Hello and welcome to Faux News. I'm your host, Bo Hughes. Today is going to be just one big monologue. In short, Microsoft Clipchamp is not the greatest program. Let's put it that way. This monologue is going to be, and the video that Clipchamp decided to delete on numerous occasions, is going to be about the U.S.-Israel relationship and the theory, let's call it, that there is far more going on in that than is projected to the public on the surface. So let's get right into that. On the surface, the U.S. Israel relationship is basically portrayed as the following, and that is that the U.S. as a country that broadly characterizes itself as a Christian country sees the Jews as God's people and wants to promote a safe haven for Jews in the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Um, in so many words, Zionism. And as a Christian, I also believe many of those same things, that the Jews are God's people. I do believe that, and the Promised Land is theirs, and that they absolutely have a right to have their own state somewhere, especially after the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust. It makes a lot of sense for them to have their own safe haven and their own nation state, which, of course, is a lot of why of Israel came into existence in the aftermath of World War II. That being said, um, there is, the right to have that state and then the means through which it is achieved. And I don't believe that, I don't myself adhere to sort of an Old Testament Joshua as, warrior, conqueror sort of mentality when it comes to Israel being able to achieve this nation state. I don't have a Machiavellian the ends justify the means attitude on it. I believe that it should still be largely achieved through humanitarian means and that there's a balance there, a titration um, that has to be recognized and respected. Um, so that kind of personal feelings aside on the issue, let's get into why I believe that, and many others, and I think this is increasing as people, with the Hamas war going on, people delving into this topic and getting very versed on it and finding out a lot of things that they didn't know beforehand. I think this sentiment is growing. Let's get into why there is more going on in the U.S.-Israel relationship than just Zionism, or another one I forgot to mention that people like to throw out there as to why our support for Israel is so critical is their, if not our only ally, certainly our greatest ally in the Middle East, and that it is of the utmost geopolitical importance, and i.e. the national interest for the U.S. to support Israel and have them as a strong ally. The reason it goes beyond this, there's a lot of different reasons. One of the most glaring is the extensive documented Israeli espionage on U.S. soil that has frequently been to the U.S. detriment, and one could argue seems to have a very unusual tolerance level for the U.S. for this activity, a tolerance level that I would think if we found MI6 or French intelligence, some of these other close allies doing the same types of things on U.S. soil, we would not have the tolerance level for it that we seem to have from the Israelis. There are numerous historical examples of this. We can go through a couple of them quickly. There was back in the 1960s, there was a famous affair called the Apollo Affair that dealt with a company called NUMEC in Western Pennsylvania. It was Nuclear Material Equipment Corporation, I believe is what that stood for. Long story short, they were in the business of uranium enrichment, refinement, and they were headed by someone named Zalman Shapiro. Uh, it was alleged that he had ties to Mossad, was seen with Mossad agents. I believe also Israeli people high up in the Israeli statesmanship at some points. These are allegations again, and therefore was under investigation by the FBI for a number of years in the late 60s. This all stemmed from the fact that NUMEC had, by uh, uh, the most estimations over a period of, I believe it was about 5 years in the 1960s, it came out that NUMEC had 600 pounds of highly enriched uranium that was unable to be accounted for by the Atomic Energy, I believe it was Atomic Energy Agency back then, which prompted that and these ties with some of these Israeli intelligence potential contacts prompted the FBI investigation. Those 600 pounds of HEU were never accounted for, and many people believe that it was funneled to the Israelis to help them quickly build their nuclear program that many people believe came online right around the same time, uh, in about 1966, 1967, on the eve of the Six Days War, which forever shaped the landscape of the Middle East. In fact, that is when Israel first took control of the Gaza Strip. It had previously been controlled by Egypt. And when they took control of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount from Jordan. So it was a monumental event that forever shaped the boundaries and geopolitics of the Middle East. Um, So that was one incident. Again, those Zalman Shapiro, to my knowledge, was never actually charged with anything. There were never any legal proceedings against him. I believe he died in Israel, I want to say in the 80s, I believe it was. So none of that has ever been concretely substantiated, but it was a very suspicious affair that is, many people helped Israel develop their nuclear program. Um, that actually goes into another interesting sidebar of history that not many people know. If you backtrack a few years, JFK was informed that the Israelis were pursuing nuclear weapons, and he did not like that at all. In fact, it's purported that he tossed around the idea of um, an airborne unit going in and attacking the Israeli, where they were doing this nuclear research and development, which is where it's still, most people believe their nuclear, at least the headquarters is today, a site called Dimona in the Negev Desert. Um, Again, JFK never did that, but I believe that comes from former close aides of his and or people associated with the Joint Chiefs of Staff that he was not at all happy that the Israelis were pursuing nukes and he was considering doing something about it. Then you have the Jonathan Pollard affair in the 1980s where he was an NSA employee and stole all sorts of highly classified documents and gave them, um, I think, both to the Israelis and also some to the Soviets. I would have to go back and look at that. He was convicted of espionage and then released, I believe, I want to say he was released in 2015. Maybe actually it's in just the last few years. He was released in within the last decade and then went back to Israel after his release. Um, he is one of the most damaging convicted espionage occurrences in U.S. history, and it was a blatant example of he was an American-born citizen, a blatant example of someone spying for the Israelis on U.S. soil, um, and passing classified material. Um, and then we can go get into the whole Epstein thing, which really prompted the the idea for making this video, this idea of there being much more there to the U.S.-Israel relationship than initially meets the eye. Because anyone that's done any sort of research on Epstein, and this has sort of come out into the public domain at this point. It is abundantly clear that he was an intelligence asset and that most likely an Israeli one. He had numerous connections, including possibly with the Saudis through, oh, um, blanking on the guy's name, a famous Saudi arms dealer from the 80s. Um, Kadoji? Was that it? I can't believe I'm blanking on his name right now. But he had a lot of connections. However, he absolutely had Israeli connections, and he absolutely was an intelligence asset. And I mean, the list of unusual things in Epstein's background and sordid connections of known intelligence people, known arms dealer people, known people involved in Iran-Contra is really incredible. I think one of the more incredible things to me about the whole thing is the fact that he had power of attorney over Les Wexner's massive estate, which a lot of people think is where he got much of the money for his lifestyle. And yet, such a high profile case, and Les Wexner, to the public's knowledge, has never been interviewed, asked anything by the authorities to try and get his side of things and what he might know about the entire operation, who was involved, etc. If there was any sort of above board transparency on trying to get to the truth of what was really going on with Epstein, he would be probably the first person that you would speak to, and he would be grilled by the FBI to get into all the nitty gritty of the financials. Why would you sign over all of your assets to him, etc.? And he's never even been interviewed, again, to the knowledge of that which is publicly available. Um, so, those sort of known intelligence connections by the Israelis on American soil. Let's now transition into sort of the broader picture of this video. And get your tinfoil hats on because this is where I lose all credibility. So, let's see where to begin. My personal thoughts on what's really going on at the greatest, as you peel back the onion and move farther and further out, is that you have the state of Israel, and then you have other actors who meet the state of Israel at a confluence where they have intersecting interests, and then you get this powerful um, alliance, let's say, moving towards the same general objective. Um, those two main parties are again Israel. Before I say this, let me just give the standard disclaimer. I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm not trying to espouse, central banking Jewish conspiracy theories, which have been rampant throughout, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which have been rampant throughout much of the last probably 200 years plus. No, I'm just making some connections here, and we're talking about the state of Israel and not all Jewish people, and even not even the entire state of Israel per se, but maybe those along the lines of your more far right Israeli political stance, let's say. Um, so getting back, so you have those. We'll just, for matters of simplicity, call them the Israeli state, the faction that I'm referring to. You have them, and then you have a second group of people who if you again put your tinfoil hat on here, if you've ever listened to anyone on people that are termed far right, although they've interestingly moved much more into the mainstream of accepted thought, particularly since COVID, I would say over the last several years. Yeah, Alex Joneses, even Tucker Carlson now, many people, countless individuals that talk about these sort of globalists, the people that want to see basically a global government with central banking running the show, social credit scores, on, such that they can debank you. There is no freedom of speech. They control what you eat. They control what you can emit out of your car, if you can have a car, on and on and on. Basically, globalists seeking really authoritarian control over the world. And taking that and extrapolating it even further, that these people, at least many of them, are actual full-on Luciferians, meaning they worship Satan, and they seek they have a Luciferian uh, belief system to them, and many of them are even involved in witchcraft, like many Satanists and Luciferians, and that they are, and this is where it gets interesting. Um, the reason why they have an interest in Israel is because the Luciferians hold Solomon in high regard. Pretty much all, or at least much of the occult world, holds Solomon in high regard. Why? Well, as we know from the Bible, it even talks about this in there, that Solomon turned his back from the Lord and practiced all kinds of uh, pagan, demonic, evil practices. It tells us that he was corrupted by his foreign-born wives, and that he practiced this throughout much of his reign. A lot of Bible scholars, I believe the majority of them, will say that Scripture seems to indicate that, thankfully, at the end of his life, Solomon repented for these incredibly grievous sins and made right with God before he died. However, for much of his reign, he was heavily involved in the occult, to the point that he is seen as one of the greatest sorcerers, practitioners of witchcraft of all time, if not the greatest. And that he had control over all of the demons. And there's even things called the Greater Key of Solomon, and I believe there's also one called the Lesser Key of Solomon, that came out in, I believe they actually came to print in the Middle Ages, and they're attributed to Solomon, and they're, witchcraft textbooks, cookbooks, whatever. So he is a very revered figure within the occult. And likewise, so is the Temple Mount, because the Solomon and the Temple Mount are basically seen as synonymous, because, of course, Solomon is the one that built the first temple, and it was glorious and magnificent, we are told. So that is, and it's very interesting if you ever do any research into the very disturbing topic of satanic ritual abuse, and you hear from survivors that contend that they were tragically um, put through this as children. They'll say a number of things. One of the things that's interesting is they talk about how this is practiced by Satanists to produce split personalities, so that these people can be controlled, or so that these personalities can be switched on one to the other, sort of when prudent or pragmatic in various situations. Um, but one of the other things that you'll hear people a lot of times say is that the Satanists had a particular interest in them because, through testing or some means, they believed that they were from the line of Solomon, the bloodline of Solomon. This is because the occult holds Solomon in such high regard. Um, so that explains very briefly the occult and Luciferians' fixation with Solomon, and by extension, the Temple Mount. We could also briefly, and the Freemasons hold a lot of this same obsession with Solomon and the Temple Mount. A lot of people believe that the Freemasons came out of the Knights Templar, which was a medieval sort of like elite bodyguard unit in the Holy Land, that evolved into something much bigger and more powerful than that. They really kind of ran the show, or at least a lot of it, over in the Holy Land, and interestingly enough, had their headquarters on the Temple Mount. There's all sorts of conspiracy theories about the Templars, that they might have dug underneath the temple and uncovered all sorts of, relics, the Holy Grail, perhaps the Ark of the Covenant, etc. we won't go down that crazy rabbit hole, but they're a very infamous and revered organization that was eventually attacked by the French monarch. They did not, they had too much power, they felt, and so they killed its leaders and basically disbanded the organization. Many people believe that this later on, these members or people of similar thinking went into hiding and it evolved into the Freemasons over time, with also the Rosicrucians sort of there in the middle, in between the two epochs of the end of the Templars and then the emergence of the Freemasons. Um, but that is a very interesting sort of connection because the Freemasons are very well known, and especially in history, American history. The founding fathers, many of them are Freemasons, etc. And the fact that they have such a fixation on Solomon and the Temple Mount and the Knights Templar is very interesting. In fact, Harry Truman, who was a 33rd degree Mason, the highest level that one can achieve, was a member of the Order of De Molay. Well, De Molay was the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, who was burned at the stake by the French monarchy in the early 14th century. So, um, sort of circling back to the main uh, idea behind this video, you've got this confluence of interests, and you have the Israelis, and like most things, you have a lot of people who get played and deceived. Good people that just they have good intentions, they think they're going along with something right, and they jump on the same train where when there's evil people running the train, but they have kind of bamboozled people into the true nature or spirit behind things. And you see that all the time with countless things, and I believe this is also one of those things. Um, but you have the Israelis, and then you have these globalists, many of whom, probably not all. Um, there's always going to be, nothing's ever going to be homogenous. You're going to have all sorts of different, varying degrees of allegiances to various groups, how deeply someone's into the occult. If they're not in the occult at all, however, they might have somewhat of a Luciferian mindset. We'll just call them globalist elites, many of whom are full-on satanic and many of whom have Luciferian belief systems and ambitions. And you have these two groups that both want to see the same thing, which is they want to see the rebuilding of the third temple on the Temple Mount, because both groups have an interest in seeing that happen. Um, the Luciferians and the globalists have an interest in the Temple Mount in and of itself, as spoken of before, because of King Solomon and the occult and the ties in that way. Why they want to see the temple actually rebuilt is a whole nother matter that, quite honestly, I need to delve into a little bit further myself. My initial inclination is that they probably believe that the Antichrist is actually their quote unquote savior, and they know that he is supposed to rebuild the third temple, which is very interesting because unfortunately, the Jews who are still waiting on their Messiah also believe basically the same thing, in that they believe that the Messiah will be mortal. They believe that he will be Jewish, of course, but a great peacemaker, and that he will rebuild the third temple. So you get the confluence of all these interests, and they all intersect at the Temple Mount. We could get into the Temple Mount and the idea that it is a portal between all dimensions, or at least certainly between the earth and heaven. Uh, that also could be within the occult belief system, and also explain their fixation on it. I don't know. I haven't investigated that myself. If you look at biblical teachings and you talk the thousand-year reign on earth by Jesus and numerous other things, to me, it seems very clear that the Temple Mount is probably the nexus of the universe and therefore a portal into all dimensions. Um, so we won't, that gets into all sorts of metaphysics and other things that we won't get into. But to kind of tie things up and bring them back from conspiracy theory to what we see at the surface level in today's world, uh, I believe that that's what's going on. That explains the US's, particularly, I would say, in the last 40 years, I would say, the US's unwavering support for Israel in terms of defense spending, collaboration. There was this thing called Stuxnet, which was, many people believe, a joint Israeli computer hacking venture that put a virus into the Iranian computer systems in their nuclear um, program. That was about, I think, 2012, I want to, or maybe 2009 when that occurred. Um, there's a very friendly relationship there between the U.S. and Israel that goes beyond friendly because often the U.S. does not act in its own interests. It acts in the interests of Israel to the point that it seems like Israel is really the one wearing the pants in the relationship, despite being a far, far smaller state with a far less power by any sort of uh, statistical metric. Um, and as you see the current situation in Gaza play out, and the U.S. can even now to continue to hold to this strong support for Israel, that's where I really started to delve into this topic more myself and find out some of these things, as many people have, that there clearly is something more going on there, unfortunately, of a dark and sinister nature, i.e., blackmail, which is a lot of the interest in Epstein. Did he blackmail a lot of popular people into doing the bidding for various intelligence agencies, be that, American, Israeli, whatever? Um, and I think there's credibility to that line of thinking, absolutely. You simply can't, the math no longer computes on the level of support that the U.S. is giving Israel, and they're giving them too much latitude, in my strong opinion, in Gaza. That war, the way it has been handled, is not human. I don't want to get too political. That's for a separate video, but it has not been handled nearly appropriately from a humanitarian and morality perspective as it should have been and could have been. And the U.S. has largely been aiding it and abetting it, which is very disappointing and hard to explain outside of going down the line of thinking that has made up this video. Um, I think that pretty much covers everything. So, in short, what you see going on in the world is that it is not all about the Benjamins so much as it is all about the Temple Mount. It is all about the Temple Mount. There are very, very powerful interests who, though they diverge in many ways on their backgrounds and makeup in terms of religious or nationality or whatever, they all have one similar interest, one similar supreme objective, which they are all after. And that is that they want to see the temple rebuilt, which means that there has to be sort of a peace, or at least a homogenous control by the Israelis over of course, over the Temple Mount, but also the larger surrounding region, and that there has to be a peace. And that explains a lot of what you see going on in the world, and you see the formation, um, the necessary stars aligning for that to happen. To my knowledge, it wasn't even until recent years where the construction of the temple really sort of became a non-taboo talking um, topic with the Israeli public. And it is absolutely out in the open now and openly discussed. Before, it was, I think, largely seen as taboo. In fact, I believe, based on, I don't know if this is the right word, but rabbinical decree, a lot of Jews were not even allowed to visit the Temple Mount because they were seen as, because it was such a holy site. Um, and they were seen as unworthy of doing so, or also maybe for political reasons, because of course the Al Aqsa Mosque currently sits there. Um, so, uh, buckle your seatbelt, I guess, is what I have to say in closing, because you see with after October 7th, it really seems like Israel's just sort of taken an attitude, a finality kind of attitude, like, all right, that's it. We're not playing games anymore, and we are going to take the promised land. We're not going to have this two-state solution idea floated around. We're not going to not go after our objectives, like you hear about all these settlers in the West Bank and clashes and things that are not adhering to the boundaries that have been imposed decades ago. Um, you just see a move for autonomy by Israel, an unprecedented one, over that entire region. And that is what's going to be necessary for the third temple to be rebuilt. That combined with a peace brought about by, no doubt, the surrounding nations sort of finally saying, okay to Israel, yes, we'll let you have this. So, I believe that's it. Delving further into the Epstein matter could be an entire Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi. That was the Saudi arms dealer from that was very, very active, especially in the 80s. But that was the name I was blanking on earlier, who was a close associate of Epstein. So that actually wraps things up nicely. Going further into the whole Epstein thing could be an entire another video. We touched on a little bit here because it was relevant to the overarching conversation, but I think that concludes this video, and I hope was a good encompassing thought piece on what could be going on with this entire U.S.-Israel relationship. So thank you for watching, and as always, it's not fake news, it's faux news.